But we've got another match from this round, another winning in, and we're going to be jumping into a match in progress. We're going to jump right into game 2 of this matchup of this Kaisa mirror, and we'll see who can actually come out on top and earn a spot in that top 64. So let's jump right in to our second match of this round, going right into game 2, Carmen versus Shekki.
CarmenHandiego, dear friend of mine, professional colleague in a number of respects, someone who feels very confident in their list of Kaisa, has done a lot of preparation leading up to this event, coming to us from the Seattle, Washington area. Finished in the top 8 of the Star City Games 10K recently.
Yeah. Very great performance there.
Was talking to me in between rounds, saying earlier today she had lost her first Kaisa mirror of all time.
Wow. Did she say who she lost to?
I didn't get a name.
All right.
Only the story.
That's all right. She was she actually kind of repopularized the rear guard as a 2-drop for the Kaisa deck. I think a lot of players were really low on that card, and then we saw Carmen with her full 3 copies at Vegas, and just showcasing how aggressive you can get with that card and how that Accelerate can really combo with Time Warp as well, especially, and a lot of players really enjoyed that rear guard afterwards.
Although I do not know the particulars of Carmen's list, I know she is generally bearish on Time Warp in the deck.
Nice. Well, that's a lot of players have started to come off it coming into this event.
I think there's a perception among certain players that the Time Warp is already kind of selecting for games that you were likely to win anyway, and the opportunity cost of having a 10-cost spell where, you know, the deck is not light on power costs and recycling. Your champion does, or your legend rather, does mitigate some of it, not all of it. It's not trivial to get there, and the cost of having a card in your hand you can't do anything with is pretty high.
Yeah. And just to take stock of where we are in this series, Shekki up 1-0 against Carmen, going into game 2. See what the battlefields are when they flip this, as they're just going through start of game procedures. But yeah, I mean, as you said, Carmen said that she lost her first Kaisa mirror, now down a game in another Kaisa mirror. This one for that day 2, for that top 64.
Yes. Now I believe some number of the X and 2s will make it, but obviously you don't want to leave it to chance. X1 and 1 is a very solid record that sees you into the top 64. Carmen would have to sweat it out if she picks up a second loss.
Yeah. Not exactly a losing out, but certainly a winning in.
Yeah.
As we do have the battlefields for this game 2, Star Tip Peak for Shekki, going to be looking for those extra runes on hold. Usually this battlefield used to counteract some of the Aurora lists, try and help you kind of keep up with your runes in those. And on the other side, Carmen taking a much different approach with the Arena's Greatest, trying to just win as fast as possible. And being on the play for Arena's Greatest, very big advantage, I would say, in the mirror.
Especially if your opponent's not anticipating it, right?
Yeah.
If it's set up for something of a slower game and suddenly they're playing a 7, there's like a lot of cascading consequences that can come from that sort of thing.
All right, Mulligan's coming through, 2 to the bottom for Carmen. Same for Shekki. I saw a Falling Star and what looked like a Void Seeker in the hand of Carmen. Both great cards in the mirror. Void Seeker going to help you deal with the opposing Kaisa. And then, of course, Falling Star is just how you keep cleaning up the small stuff, not letting the points come through for Shekki. Very important to just keep the board clear, create your own board. That's the mirror in a nutshell. As simple as I can put it.
But, you know, Carmen's plan, especially going first here, is those removal spells are great. All of it's predicated on having something to get the ball rolling. You need to have your critical mass. Because if you're saying go, just sitting there with removal spells, that is not a winning recipe. You got to start establishing some presence, have an opportunity for some of your tricks to manifest, and use your removal spells to keep your opponent from being able to engage in the battlefield.
Yeah, and it was great earlier. You know, we were talking about the Lee Sin matchup versus the Kaisa, talking about the 4s and 7s, and that kind of comes into play again in the Kaisa mirror. There's
Yes.
the Noctis Hopefuls coming in at that 4 breakpoint that are very important in this mirror, being able to try and establish those wide boards of 4s that become difficult to manage. And then, you know, Watcher, it's a 7 tech. It does a lot of things, but that body becomes quite difficult to deal with once it actually kind of hits the board outside of your own Watcher, and it creates a lot of trouble in that late game. So we are kind of still looking at those 4s and 7s.
Yeah. So the anti-magic numbers are 3s and 6s.
Yes.
That is a maximum exposure to Falling Star, maximum exposure to Singularity. You can kind of actually approach it the other way, where it's just like, yeah, load up on 1s. If you want to just make a bunch of recruits, and that's not going to be that's going to be strong against Falling Star and Singularity. But if you do want to engage with more middle of the road, mid-range units, you want to avoid 3s and 6s unless they have some built-in immunity to Falling Star or Singularity.
Just kicking things off, Carmen does get the Pouty Poro into the start to peak. However, Ravenbloom's Student is kind of the better 2 for the early stages of the game. If you have something like a Stupefy, you can just use Kaisa to pay the cost on the Poro. Really gets you ahead when sending this in. And we'll see what Shekki's follow-up to presenting the trade with the Student. And in fact, it looked like he passed focus over to Carmen, so maybe some willingness from Carmen to just accept this, but we are going to see the Void Seeker come through.
Yeah, the Carmen saying go is awfully suspicious, right? So there she's signaling, I've got a hand that can play back at you if you want to come get it. So Shekki's kind of taking offering the path of least resistance, which is to say, yeah, I'll trade. That's fine.
Yeah, and with that follow-up, he gets to kind of bait out this Void Seeker and then actually accelerate Kaisa Survivor, which is not the most common thing to happen out of the Kaisa decks, but in the mirror, I actually see it a lot more, just because claiming that point in that card can be so much more valuable in the mirror when it's not promised. You could just get Falling Starred if you leave her at the back.
Well, there's also just there's only so many windows to get it there where you're not worried about something like Stupefy. Right. A Hex Tech Ray would involve 2 cards essentially. And a lot of the other tricks are only working on offense. So that's a pretty solid window to just kind of get your value there.
Yeah, and there's exactly that Falling Star from Carmen that she held on to in the mulligan. It does get to answer the Kaisa, but sometimes in the mirror, that's not the happiest you are when you have to Falling Star the Kaisa if you can't deal with it with unit combat, and you don't get a hold on to the Falling Star to deal with the wider boards later on, where that does feel like the happy place in the mirror when you get to deal with 2 units.
Yeah. Or using it to create some sort of leverage, right?
Yeah,
like if
right,
you're
of
breaking
course.
something up and then you got to conquer a battlefield you otherwise wouldn't have, that's great. Carmen does have the rear art here to be able to take a point, but starting to run low on resources at 3 points right now. Shekki with a handful of cheap interaction.
Yeah, just going to be a Ray. Easy enough.
Yep.
Rear guard goes down. Carmen's got to let that go, and now we start to see the Hopeful hit the board, and still just plenty of answers in Shekki's hand. See the Falling Star, see a retreat. I wasn't sure about his interaction at action speed that he has. I'm kind of missing a couple of pieces of the picture here for as Carmen tries to get a couple more points on this turn. 3 runes up, threatening Void Seeker, threatening Ray. Lot in the range at 3.
Yeah. And I like that line there from Carmen. A nice way to play around Void Seeker is just not commit anything to any of the battlefields that turn. So she does develop a board. She does use all of her energy. And if Shekki was just sitting there on Void Seeker hoping to clip Kaisa or something else, that energy just got burned off.
Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just pass. This time it is going to be Falling Star going to answer the Kaisa before she's able to get a Conquer, but of course Carmen not spending a rune to accelerate, so kind of zero sum in this spot. As the rear guard, but the Hopeful will move in onto the start to peak. Second Survivor going to come in from Shekki. Seen a lot of decks go to just 1 for the champ zone, but I think the most common I've seen nowadays is the second copy.
Yeah.
No more than 2.
It is a card that's on pretty pronounced diminishing returns. It's very, very rare that the second copy is anywhere near as good for you as the first copy is. So makes a little sense to de-emphasize it just a little bit, especially because you're always starting with 1.
Back over to Carmen on 8 runes now. Looking at the sentry, just saying, okay, well, if you want to raid my sentry, go for it. Going to go up to the 4 points here. On 8, there's a lot of options you can have. That could be a watcher turn, but we're kind of far from a watcher. And just going to say, you know what? This board is good enough to rain.
Yep.
And I think sometimes just taking the 2-for-1 on your rain is, in fact, quite good enough, especially with 2 4s, which can be tricky to deal with, and rain gets to deal with it easily.
And particularly now that you've established some level of, like, you do have a battlefield right now, so it isn't just treading water. It does put some burden. It's not asking a whole lot, but at least Shekki is under some obligation to push back on that battlefield the next turn. Then you start getting into a race where maybe your accelerate units, like, you're just a little bit more efficient. It seems very likely that Shekki's going to have an advantage in a long game. These exchanges have generally been pretty profitable. So Carmen's got to kind of shorten the length here a little bit and at least try to maneuver it into a spot where the right sequence of accelerate units can clear it out before Shekki can deploy all of his cards.
Completely agree, and I think having the point lead is so massive in the mirror. You know, 1st to 6 usually wins the mirror. Now, there are a lot of edge cases, plenty of them, but that is like one heuristic you can look at. Getting 1st to 6 in the mirror is so important, and it often leads to that victory. And currently, Carmen is ahead in that race and has a good suite of accelerate in the hand with a Thousand-Tailed Watcher, and I believe I saw Darius as well. So a lot of optionality as this game continues, because we did have that retreat to save the Kaisa.
And it might not look, you know, like the most biggest inflection point in the game necessarily. It is critical that Shekki does not allow Carmen to score this hold point. Now, there's going to be a lot of ways to break that up, but going from 4 to 5 here, even you got to use a spell, the death rattle triggers, draw a card, does not matter. The point's way too important here.
Yeah, because then if you let that point through, it's a single accelerate that comes in and gets you to that 6, and that 6 is all important, especially as we get towards the end stages. And you know Carmen is on these rear guards. So rear guard plus watcher is just nightmare once they've gotten to the 6 points.
Yep.
Redevelopment from Shekki. But only 2 runes available. Maybe go time for Carmen on some of the accelerates. Now, 2 is a little bit scary with the popularity of Smokescreen coming back in this tournament to try and answer the sets, the Yis, and actually the Annies, all of them kind of having good. And a lot of Kaisa players realizing, you know what, it actually is kind of nice in the mirror sometimes. And now it adds to that range where before it was so common for it to be out of the list.
Well, as you're talking about sort of the shape of these games, and you know, it's about accelerate punk outs, and once someone gets to 4, once they get to the 6, they're very likely to get to 8, all that sort of stuff. Sometimes where these lists can get themselves into problems is just too much of their cards only play on their own turn. And you can get into spots where you have a lot of cards in hand, you have ostensibly the right stuff, but you just don't have enough interaction on your opponent's turns, and they're able to squeeze out those points. I mean, if you look at, if Shekki loses this game, it is because of that, because of just not having enough play on Carmen's turns. Every exchange in this game has been ostensibly profitable for Shekki, or almost all of them, but it's still just the race to what it is, and if you are not able to play back on your opponent's turn, then you can get into a lot of trouble, and sometimes you play some of the less efficient or more narrow stuff just to have more playback on your opponent's turn.
Yeah, and while the smokescreen could be a blowout there, right, pushing the Darius below the Kaisa, the Ray does still offer up that trade and denies Carmen those points, not only the 5 from the hold, but the 5 from the Conquer as well, and brings back parity in the matchup, which allows Shekki to start to turn things around, start to gain a point advantage when he already kind of had a card advantage earlier on, and Carmen's not going to let that happen.
Yep. I mean, again, that's not the most attractive hexagonal target necessarily. It's just keeping someone off a point that's just the most important concern by quite a bit.
Yeah, full cost hopeful, just going to be the play, and interaction kept up for Shekki now. Bunch of runes available. It looks like 5 ready to fire back on whatever Carmen wants to do. That's going to have those Void Seekers in the range if you want to try and push this hopeful for the point. And you do then have to consider from Carmen's side, do we push into whatever interaction Shekki's holding up, or do I have enough cards that I can just full develop?
Yeah.
We'll say flinch. Flinch you will. Void Seeker's going to be able to just deal with that hopeful. Draw a new card, but Carmen now having a lot more information on what possibly could be left for Shekki. 3 runes available.
Yeah, and this is not a matchup I don't think that rewards you very much for setting up. There's a lot of removal that can hit the base. And again, so much pressure is on just scoring those points that I understand abstractly. Maybe if there's a Void Seeker here, I kind of want to hold off. But I think the risk-reward proposition is just too good to try to go for it.
Honestly, this is the use case of these rear guards that I love to see. When you get to these late-game standstills, that accelerate is huge.
Yes.
That is a point that no other 2-drop is scoring for Carmen in this spot.
Also, watching this game, I hope the viewer at home who's maybe a little surprised by this has an appreciation why some of the expert Kaisa players are souring on Time Warp in the mirror.
Yeah.
This is so not about that at all. No one's ever been in a position where they could possibly play it.
There's Carmen, just the full development. Now walking into, unfortunately, you know, having to worry about Icathian Rain coming from the other side now.
Yep.
But not much room to try and play around it.
But even something like that, which would be, granted, not good for Carmen, I'm not saying that, it still doesn't break up the game plan of here's an accelerate thing, take a point, and just figure it out down the line.
Stupefied just for the card for Shekki. But it also will set up this Falling Star, goes onto the Hopeful. We are going to have the Darius come down, second card, make sure he can get the Accelerate. But that Falling Star has been sitting in hand for a while, and it's finally having the spot where it's going to allow for a full board clear.
And I think the way that Carmen's setting up the strategy is how do you play around Falling Star, right? To some extent, you can't do it. It's just going to be good. But I think the way that Carmen plays around it is by making each unit that she plays so individually threatening that you do not have the luxury of waiting for the second juicy target. You just kind of have to cash it in when you can.
Yeah, question here. Does Carmen have a retreat? Doesn't look like it. Gonna just have to let that go. Gets an extra draw. Carmen down to only 2 cards. One of them, I believe, is that Watcher, which will allow her to get back on board. But this is Shekki going to 6, threatening to end the game. He's also low econ, right? Only the 2 cards in hand. Question is, are those 2 enough to make it happen? Or can Carmen actually get control with the Thousand-Tailed Watcher?
And the way that Carmen sort of set up here strategically and tactically, I think there's a possibility that retreat is not even in her deck anymore.
Yeah. Could be game 1 sided out, or maybe not even in the deck at all.
Yeah,
I'd be
right.
curious, yeah.
Yeah. If you are just, I am going to try to be as efficient as possible. I'm going to accept exchanges that are maybe not good on the surface, just in the race to points. Retreat's kind of the opposite of that experience. So Carmen never wants to have a card in her hand that's super fidgety. Just stuff that always works.
Rain. Just deal with everything. Say you don't have 2 accelerates, which likely, I mean 2 cards in hand, just a numbers game, probably doesn't. Retreat, that increases the likelihood, as you've just put 1 back. Ooh, Rain Pass is tough here from Carmen, not even having a development to go on the back of that.
And Carmen looks like she's aware the writing is on the wall here.
Maybe there's a Phantom Watcher in Carmen's hand. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. Sometimes you get a glimpse of a card. You think you know what it is, but... Pouty Poro's second card would be Darius, but not having the double accelerate, so just going to go for the pass, keep up interaction.
Yeah.
Good patience from Shekki, recognizing you can't lose right here.
Right. Yeah. Very disciplined play, but you know, there are sequences of cards here. You know, Stupefy plus Void. It would be straining a little bit just because the Darius would go up to 7 in that world, but still erring on the side of caution here, knowing that, as you mentioned, Carmen is not threatening to win the game here.
It's just the Darius. And now with the Poro, you get to threaten to win the game with your Darius. You don't need another accelerate. You push Poro in, you push the Darius on the other side, and if Carmen doesn't immediately have an answer in these 2 cards, that'll be enough. But Carmen's just going to put a Poro, try and say, hey, you cannot conquer this side. You can trade that Darius I know you have in hand into this board. You can't end the game unless you've got a little bit more. Cleave in the hand for Shekki.
And that is, you know, card number 2 that can just be played for the purposes of Darius.
Conquer from the Pouty Poro. I think that last card is Watcher, but I might have just completely missed it. And if I did, maybe there's some kind of interaction that can save this spot. But this is Darius Cleave, 10 going into 7 to push Shekki into the top 64 on Kaisa and hand Carmen only her 2nd ever loss in that mirror. And the hand extends. That's just going to do it. Shekki moving on to the top 64, one of our Kaisas who will make it. Carmen not guaranteed out yet, could have very good breakers. X and 2 doesn't mean you're gone, just only a limited amount of those X and 2s are going to make it.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough squeeze. Now, Carmen's in better shape than most because I believe she was 5-1 the last time that we talked, and that's certainly going to be on the better end of those X and 2 tiebreakers, but we'll still have to win round number 9 to even have a shot at it. And past that, it's just fingers crossed. I mean, nothing you can do about it at this point other than try to win your round. Hopefully things shake out the right way, and we'll see if we're watching her tomorrow. And
I love that being able to watch these Kaisa mirrors where we are kind of at these top tables. This is the masterclass of the mirror. These players have likely won multiple mirrors today to even get to that point. And the fact that it was kind of even 2 different flavors. Shekki, a much more measured approach, a lot slower. The kind of deck that you would think maybe does actually even have the time warps, where on the other side, Carmen, a lot more fast, a lot more aggressive, and we see it nearly get there, but it does flame out towards the end as Shekki did have just kind of more card advantage as we got to that later stage, and you called it early on. The later that game went, the more advantage Shekki was.
Yeah, I mean, I like that Carmen's approach to the matchup is just sort of saying, this deck plays defense very poorly, so why try to defend? And also this deck is not very good at holding in the mirror, so if I could just kind of, you know, pick up my points where I can and then have some accelerate units on the back end, a lot of people are not going to be able to hang with that even if they are drawing their best cards. That game plan also very naturally plays around things like Falling Star and Singularity because you're not really trying to commit a lot of big stuff onto the table in the first place. Unfortunately, Shekki on the other side had a lot of really cheap interaction and was able to stay step to step with Carmen for the most part. It wasn't like he was sitting back on a bunch of 6s and 7s and 8s and expecting them to play catch up. He was also kind of advancing the board, and then with my 1 energy left over, I'm playing back in combat. I have some sort of removal spell, and if you are able to keep pace in terms of the tenor of the game and the speed of it, eventually your superior card quality is going to come through and eventually shut the door.
All right, well, I want to set the stage for round 9 as we're getting towards that. We have any player who came in undefeated in this last round, they've probably ID'd the last 2. They're going to make it through into the top 64. Anyone that comes into this 9th round at 7-1, they can ID the last round. They're going to make it in. There are a certain amount of players at 6-1 and 1 going into this round. This becomes guaranteed winning in for all of those players. So those are the matches we're going to try and find. Some amount of X2s can find a win in this last round, and they will sneak in as well. But these X1 and 1s that we're going to have, that is a guaranteed winning in that we'll be watching. We are going to jump to a dev interview. After that, we'll come back with that round 9, and we will get to kind of see that culmination, that winning in for a lot of these players as they try and fight their way into that top 64. Don't go anywhere.